in the current ecosystem, whether you call it the startup ecosystem or whatever, okay, what is the role of PCs? How is it going?
Yeah, I think if we talk of one defining kind of trend that India had seen in the last couple of decades, it's really the spread or the ubiquity of mobile phones, right? We recognize that, a lot of the big e-commerce players, they're pretty heavily app dependent. And their belief is that if someone downloads their app on the smartphone, they become loyal to them over time. And we've demonstrated to some of them the fact that with people shopping on PCs, the experience is much more richer.
So we'll go back to this interesting relationship between the client, between the ad agency, and people within the client system, within the ad agency system, and it's a perennially debatable topic. I mean, there are various sides to a story, etc. So. And what I've heard often is many great ideas die on the table, right, before they kind of see the light of day. And the great ideas that a marketing head kind of pushes are always very risky also, right? How did you manage to get such iconic work out over your consistently over the length of your career? What were the big risks that you take? And tell us a little bit about your failures also.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the challenges that marketers face, and I've particularly seen this transition, is that over the last decade and a half, I think that whole decision making of the marketer, in a sense, has kind of come to be questioned, right? So one of the things I saw was toward the late 90s when procurement or supply chain was getting involved with taking a decision, should we go with agency A or B? And I think at some point, one had to recognize that the value that an agency as a creative partner brings to your brand is far in excess of another vendor who's supplying another commodity. Right? Here's a certain kind of thought input into your brand. Here's a communication input that has the ability to alter the perception of your brand in people's minds. Okay. Right? So I think one is making sure that you kind of state the fact that as a marketer, you're the voice of the customer, you're the custodian of the customer, and therefore what you will say should have significant impact. Right? I think that's the one part. The other thing that I've believed in, and I've learned from some of the marketing greats I work with, Vibharishi was my boss at Pepsi. I think it's about the seamlessness of the marketing team and the agency team. I think if you don't recognize that the agency is as much a brand owner, and if they don't get the feeling that this is as much about them, I think that relationship, will always tend to be very transactional. I've really believed, and I've been fortunate as well, that if you let the agency kind of input into your brand in a manner that's just not communication, right? So back in Motorola, I think you'd remember that a lot of the inputs came from Ogilvy's team, which was not just communication oriented. It was about how we sold the product. They had inputs into packaging. They had inputs into some of the things that some of the PR events we did, the way the brand launches were. They were the first to question the fact that why is it brand launches really having pretty young models holding a phone? Can we do it differently, right? So I think it's letting the agency understand the nuances of your business, getting them into completely being a complete partner to the business, and really celebrating the victories together. So I think if that seamlessness of the team comes, work is bound to be very productive. And I've seen this in a lot of industry award functions. You can see the little pockets when there's a seamlessness of client agency. They're the ones winning the awards, right? So there's a clear larger. So it's not a transaction-based relationship. Sure. It's more a long-term. How do I get better work out?
Yeah. So there's a lot of these wars happening in the e-commerce space. Flipkart versus Snapdeal versus Amazon, etc. And my mind goes back to the 90s, to the early 2000s, the Cola Wars, and I've been fortunate to work across for both, Cola, the very different cultures, very different approaches to whatever. Sure. Tell us a little bit, and you were bang in the middle of it, the Cola Wars. Tell us what it was like.
I think interesting. I think, like I said, heady times. Beverages were a large part of people's, conversations, especially young people. I think also the fact that between Coke and Pepsi, they own pretty much all the big properties, right? Music, cricket, movies, the best stars. So I think that was good. I think the underlying point, though, was that I think the Cola War was also a smart strategy because for a product that, in a sense, is not central to people's lives, I think keeping it in the news is important. And therefore, stirring up this Cola War was, in a sense, almost part of the DNA. At the same time, I think the essence and something that we always kind of remind ourselves in Pepsi, that the cola war was not about us sending hate mail to the guys across the road, as much as using it as an opportunity to create a fun story, making young people say, oh my God, that's so cool, right? So I remember when, some of our competitors did, they kind of celebrated Valentine's Day and the classic, days that students had in college. Pepsi went ahead and did the International Samosa Day, right? Just brought a big smile to people's face, right? Our connect was, you buy yourself 4 samosas, you get a Pepsi on the house. But the whole idea was to kind of have a different twist. So a lot of it was kind of smart take, but always remembering that whatever you're doing is really about consumer. It's not about, sending a nasty missive, to the guys in red. I think that really, is what came. So that was exciting. And the other big part was really a lot about fighting over the big properties, right? Over cricket, the nothing official about it, the World Cup. So there were a lot of these big moments. And to be fair, I think, great work emerged from both sides. I mean, some of the path-breaking work that the folks at Coke did, also remarkable. I mean, the whole Amir Khan campaign was outstanding. Right. So I think it was really about keeping a constant narrative, at the same time remembering that the consumer is the centerpiece of the whole thing. And at the same time, kind of making sure the category stayed relevant in young people's lives.
The e-commerce wars, what's your take on it? A versus B versus C.
I think interesting. It's just that my point is it's yet to lift itself beyond a transaction and a price-led war, right? So what one really hears is that I don't see much of a loyalty being built around, barring for the technology aspects. I think right now it's pretty much, I can do a bigger jamboree sale, I can do a 5-day sale, I can have price cut-offs that are pretty amazing. So I think the moment the transaction or the whole war moves beyond just the scale of price and gets into building lasting consumer equity or building loyalty, I think that's when it'll come to resemble. I mean, that's when it'll kind of build really long-term advantage. Right now, it's a little bit of a land grab model. How do I get more customers, and therefore how do I throw out a bigger price discount? And again, the focus predominantly remaining within the same set of consumer electronics, mobile handsets space. It hasn't really broad-based itself across people's regular purchasing habits.
Right.
So my sense is the whole thing will have to evolve into a more omni-channel space when it's not just about e-commerce, but ability to make consumers make better buying decisions.
Lloyd, we were talking about e-commerce and cola wars of the 90s and so on, and I see a lot of similarities, and I'd like your take on it, which is, the cola guys, the big two, they always went after the passion points of young people, whether it's sports or, music or food, dating, etc., etc. I don't really see that happening in the e-commerce context, going after young people's passion points, other than, the very, very obvious, kind of thing. What's your take on it as a?
I agree completely. I think long term, if a brand has to really build a kind of relevance in consumers' lives, like brands should, I think they'd start needing to build kind of clear passion points or clear platforms that they begin to own over time. Transactional relationships tend to be short-lived and are not the great basis for a long-term brand build. So clearly, I totally agree with that.
Okay, one question that's been that's very heated, leading to a lot of heartburn, many debates online on Facebook and other platforms, is the relevance of advertising. Okay, so and good friends are becoming sworn enemies on Facebook because of slightly different points of view, etc. What I see in my personal journey from traditional advertising to digital to startup, etc., is the power center, the shifting of the power centers. Okay, so initially, I mean, when I joined at some point in the 90s or advertising, the power center was clearly with the brand. So the brand as a broadcast kind of tool, so this is who I am, this is what I do, etc. And people flock to the brand, okay, and they took great pride. Sometimes they took great pride. Now that power center, that hierarchy, whatever you call it, is kind of shifting. It's going primarily because of digital platforms. It's kind of I won't say the consumer owns the brand voice, etc. that we keep hearing about, but there's this huge shift happening, right? Brands take consumers very, very seriously. Okay. So at HP, from an HP point of view, since you're bang in the middle of the business, I mean, what is your take on it, this power shift?
Oh, it's very real. So I think two parts. I think one is, initially a lot of a brand's kind of point of view was what the brand kind of talked about in terms of a television commercial or a big print ad or a billboard.
Right.
I think increasingly we're realizing that as a brand for HP is that we need to make sure we're at the center of a conversation, and we need to curate conversations around some of the consumer's passion points, which are also relevant to technology and to our products. So I think the big challenge really is, it's really not about creating a mega campaign, at an agency level, and then using platforms like Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever to push these the same communication. I think it's the relevance of communication, making sure you stay relevant in conversations where young people are talking about, where technology has a justifiable place. So it's really about curating conversations and ensuring HP has a kind of valid point of view within those conversations.
Okay. Since we're talking about conversations, I mean, I can't, I have to end this, discussion with social media, right? From Facebook to Instagram to Snapchat, etc. What is the scenario like? What's the landscape like, in your opinion?
So two parts. I think one is, welcome this proliferation of media, the fact that consumers are actively participating in a brand's image build over time. I think it's very positive. I think what we're not ready for, or what the marketing fraternity and agencies really need to wake up to, is the fact that the creative doyens, the big boys, are still working on that magical 60-second television commercial. And I think recognizing that the amount of time that younger people spend on social media, I think that's where the real kind of creative focus has to shift. I think there's a time lag. It's not growing as considerably as one would like to see it. The second part really on the marketing side is the ability to kind of give up control, right? The historical model was, kind of you wrote out a brand brief, the agency made the copy, and then you kind of dispersed it out. So everything was in control. The fact is that with proliferation of social media, there's someone speaking your brand point of view, which may not entirely be your own employee. Very often it's a consumer, but very often it's someone from a digital agency, and you don't have that same creative levels of control, right? So there was a time in life when a print ad got signed by the product manager, the marketing manager, the VP of marketing, and so on and so forth. But it's real time, right? So if someone's having a strong point of view about a new product that we've just launched, I think it's up to the digital agency or someone to be fully empowered to actually respond to him real time. I think just having that whole mechanism in place, ensuring it's smooth, seamless, real time, and yet very articulate and speaking the brand point of view. I think that's the challenge, just getting that aspect right. And I think we've still got some way to go on that aspect.
We keep hearing about content a lot, content is king and so on. Do you think in India we're at that stage where content is really driving the conversation?
I think it is to some extent, but I think when you talk about content is king, very often you kind of have visions of marketeers putting out these gems of content that consumers lap up. I think it's not so literal. I think it's very often, like I said, curating the conversation, making sure your brand has some relevance, and also purveying things that have the ability to go viral, right? And I certainly want to desist from this. I know a very common brief that marketers make out of agencies is says, give me viral content. I think there is no such kind of magical viral content. I think the ability to latch on to something interesting and then tailor make that, or making sure contextually you introduce something relevant with your brand and conversation. I think that is the likelihood of creating or having content go viral. So I think it's really ensuring that you put in stuff that people like, because most people would still see advertising as an interruption to what they're there. No one's coming to Twitter or Facebook to consume advertising, right? He's coming to have a nice time, to talk to friends, to hear about his friends' posts. So if you can have things that are contextual, chances are you'll get noticed, chances are you'll get liked, chances are you'll be loved.
Do you think there can be content purely for PCs, mobile, the digital platforms?
Oh yes, absolutely.
As versus, a Bollywood kind of rehash happening and
Oh, absolutely. On the B2B side of our PC business, for example, we do have a lot of thought leaders who kind of put out pieces of content, which really are relevant to a CIO audience, who's a big part of our IT decision maker, people who buy our stuff. So we do have that kind of stuff. But a lot of these are really information builds. They're things that are areas of interest. The fact that it comes from a HP curated source is the kind of underlying theme, right? So it's a little goodwill that in a sense you're purveying, but really you're enhancing his knowledge. Right? A CIO is not going to follow your content on LinkedIn because you're trying to sell him a new PC, but he wants to know about what the Internet of Things is all about. He wants to know what are the new cutting edge things happening in 3D printing. And those are areas that are interest. If it so happens that an 80-year-old company that has the right to do so, HP is purveying it, good. That's going to solidify your brand. But I think the whole idea is the relevance of the content and something that a CIO or a decision maker would really want to spend time reading.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can go on with Lloyd, who has, who's an interesting guy. I mean, we just talked about one aspect of his life, and I hope I've been able to bring out some aspects of his journey which can inspire others, in the days to come. Okay. So, thank you so much, Lloyd, for your time and, very candid answers. And on behalf of AdAge India and the show, the Unicorns, it's wonderful to have you on the show, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being on.